so much for being a part of this. My name is Fran Smart Adicott, and I have the privilege of serving as the music director here for 37 years. And during that time, the Smart Fund was established in memory of my parents, Hinckley and Vista Smart. And that's Smart with 2 T's in case you're taking notes. But we established that fund so that we could have this festival to be free and open to the community and to the city. So it's our gift to our neighborhood. So if any of you would like to donate to that fund, there will be a basket out in the narthex, and you can drop some money in or a check made out to Balmoral Presbyterian Smart Fund in the memo line with 2 T's. My father was very persistent about that. Right, let's see. Now, if you would like to be on our email list, if you're not, you can just email the church. That's kind of the easiest thing, and just ask to be on the email list, and you'll get information when Donald is back in town, or when Acoustic Eidolon or other music activities are going on that you might like to know about. I'd like to thank Phil and Fran Shannon and Kathy Singleton for all of the organizational work that they put in so that this evening would be possible. And I would also like to thank our helpers out in the narthex. They helped things run so smoothly. And a big thank you to all of you who have already contributed to the Smart Fund. We'd like to keep storytelling alive and well at BBC. Now this evening, I'm sorry to say, because of COVID restrictions, we will not have an intermission or be able to sell books and CDs. But you can visit Donald's website, ddavisstoryteller.com, to hear some of his stories. And you can buy books and CDs by Googling the International Storytelling Center. And there will be a stand outside that has that information. You can take a picture of it with your phone. We're high-tech around here. And you can find a way to, excuse me, you don't need that, do you? Have some more wonderful stories coming your way. Many of you have probably heard Donald Davis tell stories before. Here, possibly, or at the Jonesboro National Storytelling Festival, or on NPR, or CNN, or Nightline, or at the Smithsonian, or at the World's Fair, which gives you kind of an idea of how fortunate we are to have him here this evening. I know you agree with me on that. So tonight, as we listen to Donald tell stories, let's be ready to let him take us on a journey. Humor, misty-eyed moments, memories, heart, wisdom. And maybe it will remind you of one of your own family stories. And maybe you will find a story to tell. So open your heart, open your imagination, and help me welcome the Dean of Storytelling, our dear friend, Donald Davis.
Oh, thank you, Fran. Exactly 20 months ago tonight, we were at a festival in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and they told us that the next day we would not be going to schools because schools were closing for COVID. That was the end of live storytelling for the next 18 months. During that time period, I did 12 festivals virtually and had many fights with Dropbox and Zoom and all those electronic things that you just do not get a reaction from. And then a couple of months ago, once again, started going to live festivals. And it's wonderful to be with you and see you. Things are beginning to open back up. Festivals are coming back to life. And every time people are just so happy to be out again. And I'm so happy to be with you and happy for you to be here together tonight. Thank you for making your plans to be here in this safe way. I'm going to tell you 3 or 4 stories, depending on how fast you listen. And by 8:30, we'll be going home. Is that a fair deal? Okay. So when I was a little boy, we went to the Methodist Church in Waynesville, North Carolina. And you know how often we went? Every Sunday. But I never gave up. We get up on Sunday morning, we'd be having breakfast, and I would say, what are we going to do today? And my daddy would say, don't you know what day it is? And I'd say, yes, it's Sunday, there's no school, what are we going to do today? And he'd say, we're going to church. And I'd say, we went last week. And he'd say, we're going again, because you know, if we're not there, they won't really have church. And I'd think, well, let's stay home, give everybody a break. No, it never worked that way. Sunday always unfolded in the same way. On Sunday morning, only on Sunday, my mother would fix pancakes for breakfast. And then after breakfast, while my little brother, my daddy, and I were getting ready to go to church, our mama would attempt to totally fix our Sunday dinner so she could put it in the refrigerator. And then when we got home, after about 3 or 4 semesters at church, we'd be able to pull the food out and eat before we starved completely to death. And then we would get in the car and drive into town to the Methodist Church. The first hour was Sunday school, and that was not bad. Because if you had a dime for the collection and you could remember one new Bible verse, you just got to play the rest of the hour. And then we'd get out of Sunday school, and my little brother Joe and I would get together, and we would say, whose turn is it this time? Whose turn is it? Whose turn is it to ask the question? Do we have to stay for big church? And there was only one answer from my mother. Yes. Go to the bathroom. I don't need to go to the bathroom. Go anyway. I just went. Go again. I can't go again. Try. Because you understand, in those days, we were only allowed to do 2 things in church. Behave. And that did not include being excused to go to the bathroom. We knew we could float out of church on Noah's second flood, and we would still never be excused to go out to the bathroom. We go to church now and we watch children, you know, they're wearing trails in the carpet, in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. I think, where are your parents? You know, being a Methodist, I never did think a whole lot about the rapture. But one day I thought about that, and I thought, you know, if the rapture comes, I hope it happens while all those children are out there in the bathroom, and they come back in and nobody's here, and they missed the whole thing because they weren't in church like they were supposed to be. But we knew how to behave. Now, we always came in on Sunday morning, and you know, there's some lost books and lost chapters in the Bible. And one of those lost chapters is chapter number 51 in the book of Genesis. You pick it up now and you think Genesis only has 50 chapters. Well, that's true now, but there used to be 51 because chapter 51 was the chapter in which Adam assigned all families in perpetuity their permanent and unchangeable seats in church. Because you know very well, if you go and you sit in the wrong seat, nobody up there even knows you're here. And our family was assigned by Adam to sit on the 4th row from the front, on the right-hand side, right next to the window that had the dead Atkins family's names in it. I can tell you that Bishop James Brenner Atkins died on December the 19th, 1923, because I read that on that window every Sunday of my growing up life. Now, they'd bring my little brother Joe in first, because they wanted to keep us as far apart as possible. And then my daddy would come in, and he would sit there with his left hand on my little brother's right knee. My dad was born in 1901, and he was too old to be in the Second World War. But during that time period, for what was called his home defense duty, he took Red Cross training and he taught first aid classes, which meant that he knew every pressure point in the human body. And he would sit there with that hand on my little brother's knee, and if that little child did anything untoward, my daddy could go, eh, and I had a crippled brother for about 2 weeks after that. Well, my mother would come in next, and my dad would sit there with his arm behind her, you know, like he loved her. But mostly so that when I came in last, he was ready for my shoulder right there. Now, we were sitting there in church. It was along about the 1st of October. You'll understand why I know that's about when it was. And you know, in those days, we did not have air conditioning because that would have made it tolerably comfortable. And in the fall of the year, when it started off cool in the morning, and then it warmed up, you know, as the day came along, if it got hot in church, one of the ushers would come down the side and pull a little chain, and a big piece of the window would open up, each of those windows, so the air could come through. And that day it got kind of hot, and Hardy Nolan was ushering, and he came slipping down the side, and he pulled that little chain, and that big window opened up, and hiding outside that window, waiting, was a heathen yellow jacket. And it came sneaking in that window, and came sneaking around behind me, and came silently sneaking up. I had my arm over the end of the pew like I was big. And that yellow jacket came up over my shoulder, and it landed right there and just stung the Methodist on me. And I just showed it to my mother. And she went, shh. And I hadn't even said anything. And I whispered, I got stung. Shh. It hurt. Shh. I need to go. Shh. I'm trying to listen to the sermon. And I had to sit there on the edge of death for the rest of that long Methodist hour, watching my finger change colors 2 or 3 times and swell up to be about 3 times as big as it was born to be. And when we got home, the totality of first aid treatment I got was 1 little drop of spit on my mother's finger stuck in the baking soda box and then held on my finger. I said, Mama, why didn't you let me go out when I got stung? She said, we do not leave church for frivolous reasons. I said, it was not frivolous, it hurt. She said, it would have hurt just as much if you had gone outside as it hurt when you stayed in there. I said, yes, but if I'd been allergic, I could have died. And my mother said, that would have been fine. Because if you had died in church, you might have gone straight to heaven, and that might be your only chance, little mister. And I said, I don't think it works that way. But that was all there was to it. There were no changes in what we had to do. Now time rolled along, and when I got a little bit older, I heard something really wonderful from that great source of important knowledge, the big boys. The big boys told me that when you got to be 13 years old, your family was tired of you if you were a boy. And so if you were a 13-year-old boy, instead of sitting downstairs with your parents, you got to go sit up in the balcony with all the other boys that were 13 years old or older, and then your parents weren't tired of you anymore because you were out of the way. And I was just waiting for that time to come. Well, I turned 13, and the first Sunday after that, we went up in the back door, and I started toward the balcony steps. My mother said, "Where do you think you're going?" And I thought, I don't think I know. But I knew better than to say that. I said, "I'm going up in the balcony." She said, "There's not time to go up there and back before church starts." I said, "I'm not going up there and back, I'm just going up there." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm 13 years old and you're tired of me." She said, "You're right about both of those things, but what does that have to do with it?" I said, "When you're a boy and you're 13, you're supposed to get to go sit upstairs with all the other boys that are that old." And my mother said, "We sit on the 4th row from the front on the right-hand side." I said, "Mama, only girls stay downstairs with their parents." She said, "I always wanted a girl." And that was the end of it. And that's when I sort of figured out why nobody else sat on that pew we sat on, because it was being saved for our eventual wives and children. We never were going to get to move. Well, that year when summertime came, an annual conference came for the Methodists, we got a new preacher. His name was Mr. Brendall, but my daddy didn't call him that because my daddy had nicknames for all our preachers. Most of those nicknames I cannot tell you about. But I can tell you what he called Mr. Brendall. Mr. Brendall had very thick glasses. His vision was very bad. And he wrote out his sermons, and then he read them in church. And so we get in church, and it'd be time for the sermon, and he'd pick up the script. And then he'd reach up and get hold of the sides of the pulpit in push-up position. And then he'd go down, read a little bit, come up and say it out loud. Read a little bit, come up and say it out loud. Up and down, all the way through. My dad would say, "Watch him go, watch him go. Old push-up, watch him go." Well, it was along about the 1st of December, and the sermon had just started, when all of a sudden, there was a little tiny odor like something could be burning. Well, old Push-Up's smell must have been as bad as his sight, because he never did smell it. He just kept going. And in a few minutes, white smoke started seeping up along the base of the baseboard, along under those windows on the side of the church, and behind us, the Medford family got up and left. And the smoke started to ease it across the church. And in front of us, the Hammocks, Dr. Frank and Dr. Doris, they were both doctors. They gathered up their children and they left because, see, they knew they were essential. And the smoke kept coming. And way on the other side of the church, the masses got up and left. There wasn't even any smoke over there, but they'd been looking for a reason to leave for years. And all of a sudden, my mother leaned down to me and she whispered, "Let's go." And I looked up at her and I said, "Shh." And she said, "Something's burning. Shh. We need to leave. Shh. I'm trying to listen to the sermon." And she gathered up my daddy and my little brother, and they climbed over me and left me in there. I wouldn't have left that place for anything in this world. Well, by the time the firemen got there, old Push-Up and I were the only two people left in that place. Everybody else had gone by then. It was all full of smoke. He couldn't even see it. But here's what they discovered. Down under the sanctuary, in an old superannuated Sunday school room that they were now just using for a storage room, they'd been getting out the Christmas decorations. And from its days as a Sunday school room, that room still had a little open flame gas heater in it. And somebody lit it up. They moved all these corrugated boxes around, and they didn't turn it off. And because the door was closed, there wasn't enough oxygen for it really to burst into flame, but it had turned a whole lot of corrugated cardboard black and made a lot of white smoke. So everything was fine till we got home. And then you would have thought my mother had stepped on a whole board covered with rusty nails without a tetanus shot.
What in the world do you act like that for? I've never seen anybody act like that.
My little brother popped up and said, going to church did her a lot of good, didn't it? And she looked at me and she said, why did you act like that? I said, because of you. You taught me that we don't leave church for frivolous reasons. She said, it was not frivolous, there was a fire. I said, no, Mama, it was just a whole lot of smoke. She said, yes, but if it had been a real fire, we could have all died. I said, that would have been fine. Because if we had all died, we might have all gone straight to heaven together. And that might be our only chance, Mama. She said, I do not think it works like that. Well, not another word was said about that, and Sunday came. We got up to church, we went up the stairs, we walked in the back door, and without speaking a single word, my daddy tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to the balcony stairs. And I went up, and they stayed down, and the whole world was happier after that. Well, going to the Methodist Church, my mother was automatically a member of what in those days was called the Women's Society of Christian Service, the WSCS. Now it's the United Methodist Women. Well, the WSCS, they would have big meetings of the ladies of the church. Maybe twice a year they'd have a general meeting. But then every month they were divided up into little groups called circles. And they would have these monthly meetings, at different members' houses. And I loved it when the circle meeting was at our house. My mother was a wonderful cook, and she operated under the assumption that everybody in the circle would come, and that everybody who came would eat something. And so she would make cakes and cookies and pies and stuff. And of course everybody didn't come. And of course everybody didn't eat something. My little brother would have enough sugar to last for 2 weeks after one of those meetings. It'd take us 2 weeks to finish off what they didn't eat. Well, that process went on through years and years because my mother did not teach school from the time I was born till I got to the 2nd grade, and my little brother Joe went to church basement kindergarten. But that year, she started teaching, and when the circle meeting was at our house, she just didn't have time to fix all the refreshments. So there was a new plan. On the afternoon before the circle meeting, we would stop in town on our way home from school, and we would go to a place called Whitman's Bakery. Mr. Whitman was in there, always, and he was always white as could be, because not only did he never go out in the sun, he always had flour all over him. And my mother would always get the same thing. She would get 2 dozen tea balls, 2 dozen Danish wedding cookies, 2 dozen sugar cookies assorted with sprinkles on the top. And my little brother Joe and I would stand there with our mouths watering, looking at the cream horns. And we'd beg and we'd beg and we'd beg. Can we have a cream horn, Mama? Can we have a cream horn? And sometimes she would buy one cream horn. And I'd bite one end off, and my brother Joe would bite the other end off, and she'd eat the middle. I never got a whole cream horn, although through that time growing up. Well, I was probably in maybe the 3rd grade, and maybe by now Joe was in the 1st grade. We were both going to school. And one Sunday, and there in church, I was reading the bulletin because one of my jobs in church was, every time they did something, mark it out, and then hold the bulletin up to be sure they knew where we're supposed to be and they didn't do anything over again. And while I was marking the bulletin, on the back of it, it said, circle number 3. We'll meet Tuesday night at the home of Miss Jo Davis. And I started getting excited right then. Well, Monday came, and I said, now, Mama, don't forget that tomorrow is when the circle meets. She said, oh, I know that tomorrow's when the circle meets. That's why I cleaned house yesterday afternoon, so Miss Brock can come and clean tomorrow. I thought, what? That's the way it always worked at our house. Well, the next day we left school, and I knew we were going to go right to Whitman's Bakery. But we didn't go that way. We started home another way. I said, Mama, don't you remember the circle meets tonight? We need to go by the bakery. She says, oh, no, I have a surprise for the ladies. I have a new plan. You see, last month at the circle meeting, all of them were complaining about how they needed to go on a diet. And I'm going to fix something that doesn't have so much sugar in it, and it'll be good, and it'll be a big surprise. So instead of going to the bakery, we came through town, and we parked right in the middle, right in front of Ralph's Cash Grocery, a little local grocery store where we did all of our grocery shopping. And my mother said, boys, you stay right here in the car. I do not have a single shoe to wear to that circle meeting tonight. And I thought, I never saw you wear a single shoe. She said, you stay in the car. I'm going to go in Josephine's dress shop and just see what kind of shoes she's gotten since the last time I've been in there. And she said to me, you are Mr. In Charge. You take care of your brother, and I'll be right back. And she went in that little dress shop, and they must not have been able to find any shoes either, because it was a long time before she came out of there. And when she came out, she had a shoe box. She must have found it. And she came over to the car and she said, we're running behind now, boys. I'm going to run over to the grocery store. You stay right here. Remember, you're Mr. In Charge. And she went over to the grocery store, and she came back in a few minutes, and she had 2 brown bags, with groceries in it. And she opened that shoe box and she said, look at these shoes. Oh my goodness. I got the wrong size. And she headed back in Josephine's. And she said, you watch your brother. I'll be right back. You are Mr. In Charge. And I don't know what happened back there in Josephine's dress shop, but she didn't come back. And she stayed, and she stayed, and she stayed, and she stayed, and she stayed. And all of a sudden, my little brother Joe, 6 years old, all of a sudden, he had a serious starvation attack. He was going to die. He was going to die. He had never eaten since he was born. He'd never lived to get home. And I thought, well, I'm Mr. In Charge. I'm supposed to take care of things like this. I wonder what Mama got in those 2 bags that I can save my brother's life with. And I looked in those bags, and one of them just had 4 loaves of bread in it. It had 2 loaves of plain white sandwich bread and 2 loaves of this product from Sunbeam called Roman meal bread that was kind of golden brown color. And in the other bag, Miss Lucy Summerall, Ralph Summerall's wife, she made this wonderful, delicious homemade pimento cheese. And then that other sack, there were 2 big containers of that pimento cheese. And I thought, we're saved, we're saved. We're not going to die. And I told my brother, I said, open some bread and let me open this pimento cheese. We'll get something going here in a minute. And he opened the bread, and I took the lid off of that pimento cheese. And you know that lid, it was just perfect. You could take the lid and sort of scoop some pimento cheese out of there with the lid. And then put it on a piece of bread, and then you had a sandwich. And we ate a sandwich each, and then we ate another sandwich each. But now it was getting real good, and we ate another one. Now, I know, memory's an odd thing. I know we could not have eaten 2 quarts of pimento cheese. But it sure seemed like it. And about that time, we saw our mama coming out of Josephine's dress shop, and we put the evidence back in those bags, and she got in the car and she says, we are so behind time, you boys are going to have to help me get ready when we get home. And we got home, and she got those bags and carried them inside, and Joe and I came in the house, and my mother opened the bags, and half the bread and half the pimento cheese was gone. And she looked at me, and she pointed into one of those empty bags, and she asked the stupidest question I've ever heard an adult person ask. She said, Mister, what do you call this? And I thought, doesn't she know that's an empty paper bag? But somehow I decided she didn't want to hear that. And she started almost crying. She says, you have ruined everything for the circle meeting. You see, what I was going to do was I was going to make a little pimento cheese sandwiches, and we'll put a piece of brown bread on one side, a piece of white bread on the other side, and then take the big giant cookie cutters and cut them out in shapes. And then we would put a little half of an olive on some of them. We'd put a little bit of some other stuff on. She got all so confused. She just said, now I don't know what I'm going to do. Well, by that time, I'd gone in the living room because I didn't need to hear anything that she needed to say to me. And while she was in the kitchen having a little fit, because my mother's fits took a little while, I got hold of the telephone and called my daddy at the bank. I said, Daddy, there's an emergency at home, an emergency. You need to come right home right now. Mother needs you. Is she okay? Yes, she's okay. She's okay. But she's got a little problem, and she needs you to come home right now. But on the way home, she needs you to do something. She needs you to come by Whitman's Bakery, and she needs you to get 2 dozen T-balls and 2 dozen Swedish wedding cookies and 2 dozen, maybe get an extra dozen, another dozen, assorted sugar cookies with sprinkles on top, and a dozen cream horns. And he said, I'll be right there. And then I went back in the kitchen, and my mother was just sitting at the table shaking her head. She didn't know what to do. And she said, what am I going to do? And I said, I've taken care of it. I've talked to my assistant, Daddy. And he's on his way home right now. In fact, by now, he may already be at Whitman's Bakery. And you know what he's getting? He's getting 2 dozen T-balls and 2 dozen Swedish wedding cookies. And maybe this time 3 dozen assorted sugar cookies with sprinkles on top and a dozen cream horns. And you could just see the relief just wash over her face. She said, as mad as I am, I have to thank you. But what are the cream horns for? I said, the cream horns are for Mr. In Charge. Well, after Bill Jones and I graduated from Davidson College, he went off to seminary down there to Columbia, and I went to seminary at Duke and began my early career as a United Methodist pastor. I was in the local church for 25 years till I retired now 33 years ago to travel full-time telling stories. So in 1972, I was sent to a new appointment. I was sent way to the tail end of North Carolina, Cherokee County, that last little county where it just squeezes down between Tennessee and Georgia, where I was going to be the director of the Cherokee County Parish, a parish of 10 churches with 1,200 members spread out all over that county. I was 28 years old, like I knew what I was doing, right? Well, it was before the days of UPS and FedEx. And so everybody in town who didn't get their mail at the post office all had the same address, Route 1. Didn't have enough people to have Route 2. It was all Route 1. And actually, the day I arrived, in the night before, a woman had died. And so the very first thing I had to do that very day was go meet somebody who was dead and have the funeral. You know, that I'd never even seen before in my entire whole life. Well, pretty soon we had a very mixed age group there. It was the little downtown church, and we had, you know, all ages. And of course, a lot of the people were older, and I began to realize I needed to find out a way to learn where people lived. Well, we had a wonderful church member there, Mr. John Christie. Mr. Christie, when I moved there, was 78 years old. He had been the church treasurer for 50 years. He had also been the president of the power company, the mayor of the town of Andrews, the chairman of the school board, the master of the lodge. He had done everything there was to do in town, and he knew everybody better than anybody else did, and he was more trusted than anybody in town. He would always come into church on Monday, and he'd do all the church business that day. Take care of everything, you know, all the bills and records and everything. He was a wonderful, wonderful person. Well, he came in one Monday, and I said, Mr. Christie, I need a little bit of help. You know, it's a little bit hard when people give me directions to somebody's house. You know, I'll ask them, how do you get up to Ms. Walker's house? They'll say, well, you go up there to where the Swans used to live. And then you turn up through there and you go on past where that big tree was hit by lightning. You know, that's the kind of instructions I got. He said, I know exactly what you mean. We used to have that same trouble working for the power company when somebody called and they had some trouble and we may not know who it was. I said, how can you help me? He said, here's what I'll do. I'll make a list of the people I think you ought to go see first. You know which ones I mean. And then every afternoon I'll come pick you up after lunch, and we'll go out and we'll meet 2 people a day. We'll find where 2 people live till we found everybody. Well, he came back in the next day. They had a sheet of notebook paper, and he had 27 names written on it. He said, there's nobody on this list who's as young as I am. They're the ones you need to find to go see. And we started out that very day, that afternoon. We got in the car, we went up and we visited Mr. and Miss Bristol. We had a nice time at their house. She was a retired Latin teacher, he was a farmer. Then we went over to see the Ropers. The Roper sisters lived together. Well, they weren't sisters. I thought they were sisters. It was actually a mom and her daughter, but you couldn't tell which one was the oldest. And they showed me pictures on the wall of all the dead relatives, pictures taken in their caskets. You know, all there on the wall in the living room. And as we came back into town that day, we passed the end of a little unpaved road. And as we passed that road, he said, up that road, that's where Miss Morton lives. Soon. And the next day he came back and we went out and we found 2 more people. As we came back into town, past that same little road, up there's where Miss Morton lives. Soon. Well, in 13 days, we had found 26 people. And there was only one name left on that list. Guess what it was? Miss Morton. And I knew if Mr. Christie wasn't going to take me up there, nobody else was, and I was on my own. Well, but then I began to learn there was something unusual about this lady because, you know, I'd be visiting around town, up and down the street. The church was right on Main Street, and, you know, I could walk over to the post office, down the street to the drugstore and back, and I could see about a third of the members just doing that. And somebody would come up to me, and they wouldn't even use her name. They'd say, "Have you met her yet?" And I thought, okay, I'm going to go get this over with. And so one afternoon, I got in the car and I drove up there. It was about 1 o'clock, you know, right after lunchtime. And I came to that little road and I turned in and I had to put on the brakes real fast. Because just about the time I cleared the pavement, I almost ran into a fence that was built across the road. I don't mean a gate. Just the fence itself was built right across the road. And as you looked up where the road used to go, there were trees grown up in it, you know, as big as your leg. That hadn't been a road for a long time. There was just a little cow gap in the fence, and then a trail that went up through there. So I left the car there, and I started up that little trail, and I thought, I don't know what I'm getting into, but I got to do it. It's time to get it on done. And as I went up through there, I began to hear this big bass-voiced dog barking. You know, and I didn't care for that. I kept trying to think, you know, is that dog closer to me than my car is? But it never got any closer as I kept going. And finally I broke out into a clearing almost as big as this room. Well, it used to be a clearing, but it was grown up about waist high with just weeds and grass and stuff. And there was the dog. It was an old dog, and it was sitting in the middle of a big old tractor tire, barking in the other direction. I learned in a little while that that dog was deaf and blind. And then to figure out somehow that somebody was coming from somewhere, but it didn't have any idea where they were coming from, so it had just picked a direction and barked that way. Right up on the other side of that clearing, there was the house. You've seen houses like this. You know, it was a frame house, 2 stories, a tin roof. It was all rusty. It had been painted when it was built and never touched with a drop of paint since then. It had a porch on the front of it, but that porch, the wooden sleepers under it had rotted out. And the porch was still fastened to the house, but the outside edge of it had dropped right down to the ground. And the roof on the porch, you know, had gone down with the porch. There wasn't any way the front door was going to open. But the trail went around toward the end of the house. And on the end of the house, there was a brick chimney. And at one time, the chimney and the house had gotten along. But through the years, they'd had a falling out. And as that chimney came up the end of that house, it just leaned farther and farther and farther from it. And you couldn't tell how the laws of gravity were being kept with that chimney leaning that far away from the house as it came up. Well, I went up the end, and there was a little door on the end of the house, and 2 little steps made out of cinder blocks. And before I got close enough to knock on the door, she must have heard that dog barking, because the door opened, and there she stood, Miss Catherine Morton. Let me start at the bottom and work up. She was wearing these old, gigantic, heavy men's Brogan work shoes. They didn't have any laces in them, and the tongues were laid down over the toe of the shoe. And as she moved, you know, her foot kind of picked up, and then the shoe caught up with it. And then as it went back down, the shoe hit the floor, and then she landed. And she was wearing these old bib overalls way before that was a popular thing for any woman to wear. One of the Galluses was still in business. One of them had given up, but this side was just sort of flopped down. She had on an army surplus, an olive drab army surplus shirt, long sleeve shirt that still had sergeant stripes sewed on the sleeves, and it had a name tag that said Brookbank over the pocket. I have no idea who Brookbank was. And then her face. Now, I grew up in Haywood County. Haywood County is the tallest county east of the Rocky Mountains. 18 mountains over 6,000 feet. And they used to tell us if you could stretch Haywood County out, it would cover Texas. And when I looked at Miss Morton's face, that's what I thought about. I thought I'd never seen a much waste of skin on anybody in my whole life. You know, if you could pull all those wrinkles out flat, you could put 3 or 4 women back in there. She was wearing these rimless glasses, you know, with little gold earpieces there, and her hair. Her hair looked like it had been swept up off of the floor of the Brillo factory on Friday afternoon and then got wet and rusted. Well, I didn't say a word. I was just kind of speechless, just taking it all in. And she looked down and she said to me, "You must be that new little preacher boy. Because I know everybody else and I don't know you, so you must be it. Not him, but it." She says, "Come on in. I'm fixing to eat dinner. You can have dinner with me." Well, I stepped up and went in the door, and we were standing in what was properly described as the living room, because it was the room in which she obviously totally and completely lived. There was a wood stove over in the corner with a cane-bottom chair on each side of it. And then right here in front of where, you know, the front non-functional front door was, there was an old sleeper sofa. Not the kind that the mattress comes up out of, but the kind where you just went click, click on the back and it flopped down. And like all of those sleeper sofas that were ever built, it was upholstered with green plastic. And on top of it was an army surplus mummy kind of sleeping bag and 2 old pillows at the top of it. And down on the floor beside it, her accoutrements of the night. There was a blue leather Eastern Star Bible. It had an Eastern Star symbol on the front of it. There was a big pile of wandering Kleenex. Just kind of wandering around here and there on the floor. There was an almost empty antique jar of Vicks Vapor Rub. There's a pretty new little jar of Vaseline. And what looked like a whole little wood pile with some high mileage Q-tips. She says, "Well, let's go in the kitchen. Be careful on the way in there, because that's where I keep my rock collection." And we started in the door of this little kitchen, and there was a little open path from the door to the refrigerator. And the rest of the entire floor was covered with rocks. I mean, organized, little rows of rocks, little, you know, laid out little rows of rocks all over the floor. The kitchen table had little rows of rocks on it, all lined up there. The kitchen counters had little rows of rocks on them, all over the place. All the doors had been taken off the cabinets, and the shelves in the cabinets had little rows of rocks in them, all over the place. And in the sink, there were a whole bunch of rocks that hadn't been washed and put in little rows yet. And she says, "See my rock collection." I said, "I see your rock collection. All of them look just alike to me. They were just rocks." She said, "Let's go over here to the refrigerator and we'll get our dinner out." And we went over there and she opened the refrigerator, and there were only 2 things in there. Little glass bottle Coca-Colas, you know, the kind you return the bottles on. And Reese's peanut butter cups. And she got out a Reese's peanut butter cup and whipped the knife out of her pocket, opened it up with her teeth, and she cut that candy in 2, and she kept half and gave me half. And then, much to my relief, we each got our own Coca-Cola. And we went back in the living room and sat down on the sofa, and that afternoon I had my first wonderful visit with Miss Catherine Serene Morton. Now, she explained to me that for 40 years she had been a high school English teacher, and that she had taught in every high school in the seven westernmost counties of North Carolina. And after that visit, I went back and got the map out, and I took all those counties, Haywood, Jackson, Swain, all across through there, and I counted up the high schools in there, and I divided them into 40 years. And I realized that she had been very frequently highly recommended. Well, because she was retired, she had a teacher's pension, but she had this peculiar belief that since she was no longer working, she shouldn't take money from the school system. So every month her pension check would come, and on the front she had marked "no longer working," and she'd send it back to Raleigh. And no matter how hard anybody tried, they could never convince her that that was already her money, that she had already earned. No, she was no longer working. She wasn't going to take that money. If she was no longer working, she'd send it back. Which created a little community problem, because now the community had to come up with little jobs for her to do, so she would accept a little bit of money for those little jobs, and she'd be able to survive and feed herself and live. Her main job was mowing the cemeteries in the non-perpetual care big Valley Town Cemetery. She would mow cemetery plots for 50 cents a dead relative. And if you had a plot you hadn't used yet, she'd mow it for you for free, because you were paying for the dead ones to get mowed. One day after that visit, she called me on the telephone one day. She had a telephone because the community had put a telephone in her house, and people took turns paying the bill, so if she got sick, she could call on the telephone. She wasn't going to have it herself. But she called me one day and she said, "Preacher, preacher, preacher, I got an idea about how you can make good money. I know they can't pay you much down there at the church, but I'm going to help you out. Big money, big money. Just listen to my idea." She said, "You know, I mow cemetery plots for people over there at the cemetery. And I go over there and sometimes I'll mow 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 in one day. And that might be for several different families. And you know, they all pay me for the plots, but every one of those families gives me $1 for gas money. I might get $7 or $8 or $9 or $10 for gas money. I've been calling that taxi man down there in town, you know, Fodder Blade, but I believe from now on, I'll call you. And you can come and get me, and we'll load up the lawnmower and get some gas, and we'll go over there. You probably like to read books. You can sit on a tombstone and read books while I mow. And I'll give you the gas money. Big money, big money." Did you ever hear your mouth say something you hadn't thought about yet? I don't know where it came from, but it was a gift from the Creator. I said, "Miss Morton, you know that taxi man? Well, let me tell you, we've just got one child, and he's got 5 children. He needs that money a whole lot more than I do. I think you better just keep calling him." And I was out of it. Well, I finally finished that first day, and I got ready to go, and she said, "Don't go yet. You got to see my cats." I said, "I saw them in the yard when I was coming in." She says, "Oh, no, you only saw the yellow ones. I let them out by the color. Come see the rest of them." And opposite where that little kitchen was, there was a little tiny hallway and 3 doors. Must have been 3 little tiny bedrooms. But those doors had been sawed off right above the top hinge. So there was an opening at the top. And she pulled a chair up. She says, "Step on this chair. Here, this room, this is where I keep all the cats that are black or white or black and white or anything to do with black and white." And I stepped up on the chair and looked over, and sure enough, down in there, I don't know how many they were there, but they were all black or white, or black and white, or black or something to do with white. She said, we can skip the next one. That's where the yellow cat's stuck. Back in the back here is a miscellany. And we went on to the back and we looked over, and there were all kinds of strange cats in there. She says, that's the way I keep up with them. They get along better that way. I said, how many have you got? She said, when I got up this morning or right now? She said, when I got up this morning, I think I had 34, but I believe I picked up a couple as the days got along. And I was discovering that little stubby road down there, that was the dropping off place for all the unwanted cats in that end of Cherokee County. Well, we finished our visit, and I went on back, and I just had a wonderful time. It was an educational time. It was an uplifting time. And I didn't mind going up there at all. You know, down there at the church, every time I would just get up to here, you know, with normal, I'd go back up there and get restored with abnormality again. And it was just delicious and refreshing all the way around. I went up there to see her one day, and she had the side of her face was all swollen up, just all swollen. And she had a rag tied around her head, you know, like Marty's ghost in the old Christmas Carol movie. And I said, what in the world is the matter with you? She said, I've got an abscessed tooth, and it's coming through on the outside. I said, you need to go to the dentist. Well, see, a little bit before that, a new family had moved to town, the Bunions. And Dr. Bunyan was a retired veterinarian. He had been the veterinarian at the Cincinnati Zoo in Ohio. And when he retired and came to North Carolina, he didn't want anybody to know he'd been a veterinarian. He was through with that. He was putting it away. He wanted to just garden and read and have a retirement. But he told me one day he was over at a neighbor's house. He was borrowing a rototiller. He was going to set out some asparagus. He was borrowing a rototiller, and the man was a farmer, and he had a cow down in his barn. And Gerald said, I went in the barn with that man, and as soon as I looked at that cow, I knew exactly what the trouble was. That cow was trying to deliver a calf that was dead. And he said, what was I going to do? Stand there knowing what to do and watch the man's cow die? Or was it going to come out? Well, he decided to come out. They got the sharpest knife they could find. It was a Swiss Army knife. They got the Swiss Army knife, sterilized it with a Zippo lighter. He did what he had to do, went inside the cow, dissected the dead calf, took it all out in pieces, and the man's good cow lived. But the next day he was back in practice. The word spread. Well, he had been a big animal person there at the zoo, handled everything, you know, from snakes to water buffalo. And he didn't mind doing this. He didn't open an office. He just got a pickup truck, and he equipped it, you know, with all his veterinary stuff, and he would go around and he would make farm calls. One day he came by and he said to me, he said, I've heard about this lady that's got all those cats up there. And they tell me you're the person to take me to meet her. I thought they did they? He said, yeah, that's what everybody says. You'll take me up there. I said, I'll take you up there. He said, I want to go up there and see if we can vaccinate them for rabies, you know, just for community service. I said, I'll take you up there, but she's not going to pay you. She didn't ask you to come. He said, I don't mean to get paid. I just want to go do it because it ought to be done. So we went up there, parked his truck, and walked up to the house, and I said, Miss Morton, this is Dr. Morton. She said, Dr. Bunyan. She said, I'm not sick. I said, no, he's a cat doctor. She laughed her head off. He said, I came up here to see, you have some beautiful cats here. I came to see the cats, and I'd like to see if I could give them rabies shots. She said, well, I didn't ask you, so I'm not going to pay if you do it. He said, I don't need to get paid. I just like to give them rabies shots. If you'll catch them and bring them to me one at a time, that's what we'll do. And he sat down, got all of his stuff together. She brought him a cat. First thing he wanted to know was, what was its name? How old was it? He started petting the cat. The cat started purring. He started scratching the cat under the chin, scratching it on the tummy. Pretty soon he and the cat had made good best friends. And then he gave it the shot and moved along. We spent the entire afternoon doing that. He was in absolutely no hurry, and she fell in love with him, watching the way he cared for those cats. She had one poor old cat named Buster, and Buster was living in a box under the wood stove. Buster had almost no hair left, and he had lumps all over him. And Jerry got Buster, he even got Buster purring. He said, Miss Morton, you know Buster's here is in bad shape. He's got cancer, he has tumors. She said, I figured that. And he's very miserable. He's just terribly miserable. Would you like for me to just help Buster go on home? And she decided by that time she would like that. And she held Buster while Dr. Morton put that old sick cat to sleep. Well, she was so impressed by then, she decided to pay him. We counted it up, and he had vaccinated 31 cats. And she gave him $3.10. 10 cents a cat for 31 cats. And I said, that's the most anybody's ever gotten for doing anything up here. You better be happy about it. Well, the day I went up there and her face was all swelled up, and I said, what's the matter? And she said, I've got an abscess tooth, and it's about to break through on the outside. I said, you need to go to the dentist. She says, I've been and I'm not going back. I said, why not? She says, I went down there and I got up in that dentist chair, and that dentist looked in my mouth and he said, Miss Morton, this is a bad case you've got. I'm going to have to put you to sleep. And I jumped up and ran all the way home after that. And I had to hunt all over western North Carolina to Silva, to Bryson City, and to Murphy, trying to find a dentist who would pull that tooth without putting her to sleep and removing it surgically. Her old bones were so brittle, and I finally found a fellow in Bryson City, and I took her over there, and we spent a long time. He wiggled that tooth. He said, I was scared to death I was going to break her jaw if I really put pressure on it. He said, but I just finally worried it out of there. And between getting the tooth out and a good dose of antibiotic, in about 10 days, she was, I almost said, back to normal. Well, I loved going to see her. And Dr. Bunyan, he'd like to go see her. And just every once in a while, we'd go because she was always having cats. And he needed to, vaccinate them more. And he'd give distemper and he'd give rabies. He'd just slip things in because, once he was working on them, he just kept working on them. One day we went up there and he had dug sweet potatoes out of his garden. And he brought her a whole sack of sweet potatoes. And walked up to the door and said, Miss Morton, I brought you something from the garden. I brought you some sweet potatoes. She just said, are they cooked? He took them back home after that. Well, it was that same day we were there, and we had caught up all the cats on their vaccinations, and she said, Doc, I'm getting old. I'm getting real old, and it's getting harder for me to move around. And my cats keep making more cats. Is there a way you could put a stop to that? He said, well, there is. Let me go back down to the truck and get my stuff, and then the male cats, so we can we could put them in neutral. And he came back up there, and he had a scalpel and a big tall rubber boot. And we went outside, and he sat down on the chopping block out there where the wood pile was, and he put that boot between his knees, and he got the scalpel, and he says, okay, bring me the first one. And she brought him a big old tomcat. He got the cat. He knew their names by now. He petted the cat, got it all purring, scratched it up under the chin, scratched on the belly, all purring, all purring. Then all of a sudden, he ran that cat head first down in that boot, clamped his knees down over it, pulled its tail back and went swirp. And that cat was gone. He said, we don't teach it like this in veterinary schools. But you know, if you do it that whole long way, you'll lose one every once in a while just from anesthesia. He said, I never lost one like this. Look, he's already eaten again. He just doesn't even know what's happened to him. We put 14 tomcats out of gear that afternoon. She was very happy about it. Well, time gradually rolled along, and we came up to Christmas time. Every year at Christmas, we would have a tree in the church. It would be a non-decorated fir tree. And beside it, there would be a sack full of clothespins. The ladies called it the white gift tree. And people would bring gifts just wrapped in white paper, and they would say something on them like, 7-year-old boy, or a 15-year-old girl, all kinds of labels like that. And they would build up under that tree. And then on Christmas Eve, Joe Wheeler, who was a caseworker with social services, he would get all those presents. And then on Christmas Day, he would take them to places where, Santa Claus lost his man. But the reason those clothespins were there was because people would also clip currency on the tree. They clipped dollar bills, sometimes more than $1. And gradually, the Christmas Eve service, that whole tree would be covered with currency. And then there was a committee that would have a little meeting after that and divide up that currency, and it would go out to families that just needed a little boost at that time of year. Well, that first Christmas, we had the tree, and Joe got the presents, and then the committee got together and counted up all the money, and there were 7 places it was going to go. And there was an immediate volunteer to take the ropers their money. There was an immediate volunteer to take Miss Blaylock her money. There was a volunteer for everybody till we got to Miss Morton. And then without a discussion, in unison, the whole committee said, preacher will do it. And I was very happy to do it. I enjoyed it by now. Well, the next morning, we woke up, and for the only honest time in my whole life, we had had snow in the night before, and we truly had an honest white Christmas. And I started out up to her house with an envelope from the church going up there in the snow. And the snow made it so quiet, but now that old dog was long gone. The snow made it so quiet, she didn't hear me coming. I knocked on the door, and she opened the door. She said, well, preacher boy, what are you doing up here? Aren't you down there helping out with Santa Claus at your house? I says, oh, yeah, but I've done that. I brought you something. She said, come in the house. I went up there, got up in the house. She said, what'd you bring me? I said, I brought you something from the church. She said, what is it? I said, I think it's some money. She said, how much is it? I said, I don't know. You'll have to count it. And she opened up that envelope, and she counted out. It was 27 $1 bills. And she thought for a minute. And then she took out $4, folded the $4, and put them in the bib pocket of her overalls. And then she took the rest of that money and put it back in the envelope. And she handed it to me, and she said, "Take this back down there to the church and use it for the needy." Well, that week between Christmas and New Year's, we were having the last budget meeting of the year, setting the budget for the next year. And up until that moment, I thought of all kinds of reasons I needed to be paid more. But once she pulled that little trick, I couldn't ask for another penny. Not another penny. Well, I was not there when she died. I'd been moved on to another place by then. Heard later that the preacher who came after me was scared of her and he wouldn't go up there. I cannot imagine anybody being scared of her. But I also heard that a time came when nobody saw her around town anymore. She wasn't coming, and about a week passed and nobody had seen her. And since the new preacher wouldn't go up there, Peyton Ivy from the funeral home volunteered to go up and see what happened because he could handle whatever he ran into. And he went up to her house, and the door was unlocked like it always was, and he went in, and sure enough, she had died in her sleep right there in her sleeping bag. And on the floor beside her was a cigar box, and on the top of it said, "For Dr. Gerald Bunyan." And in that cigar box was 33 $1 bills and a letter to Dr. Bunyan asking him to accept $33 to put her current 33 cats to sleep so they could be buried with her, because she knew nobody else in the world would ever take care of her. Gerald Bunyan read that note and he said, "You can forget about that. I got too much money in those cats." And he took them all home with him. And his wife Nancy told me for about the next 6 weeks, every little kid that came within throwing distance got a well-vaccinated cat to take home. Well, I learned a lot of wonderful, valuable lessons from that dear lady that I could never have learned any other way. I learned that in the course of my whole life, no matter what the circumstances are, I will never, ever be poor enough that I cannot still honestly call myself wealthy. I learned how important it is for us to have people like Miss Morton living on the edges of our communities. Because it's people like her who allowed the rest of us to live with the wonderful illusion that we're normal. And I learned that if you want to live forever, be weird. Because nearly 50 years later, I can still not go back to the town of Andrews without hearing another story still living about dear old Miss Moore. Well, we got caught today. We were driving along, and the car turned in at this parking lot where there was a Hobby Lobby store. I didn't have anything to do with it. Raise your hand. And, in there, you would think that next week is Christmas. I mean, it's almost half the whole store. It's got Christmas stuff in it. That got me all stirred up to end tonight with a little Christmas story. Start getting us ready. I was 9 years old. My little brother Joe was 7 years old. And that year, both of us wanted the same thing for Christmas. Because a couple of years before that, you know what we had figured out? We figured out if we both get the same thing for Christmas, we could start right in playing instead of having to fight over who got the best stuff. And that year, both of us wanted red scooters for Christmas. Now, these were not little, made in Taiwan, little wimpy, razory kind of scooters. No, these were great big old stamped out of steel, made in America scooters with solid rubber wheels on the front and the back and a little handle in the front where you'd steer those things. And you put one foot up on it, you push, and then you really go. They even had a little brake thing on the back of it. They didn't know we didn't have enough pavement in the mountains to ever go fast enough to put on the brakes anywhere. And every time we'd go see Santa Claus, we would ask for those scooters. We went to town one day and we went in Belk's store, and Santa Claus is back in there. Soon as I saw him, I ran and got in line. Soon as my little brother saw him, he hollered, "No!" and ran the other way and hid. The reason he hid was because of what had happened 2 years before that. 2 years before that, we'd gone to see Santa Claus, and it was a day when there were no other children waiting in line. And so Santa Claus was in no hurry. He talked to me, and then he got hold of my little brother, who was at that time 5 years old. And he held him and talked to him. And he held him and talked to him. And he held him and talked to him. I could see my little brother's legs going. I knew what that meant. Santa Claus supposedly knows everything in the world. But he didn't know about that. He just kept holding my brother. All of a sudden, Santa Claus threw my brother about halfway across the store. But it was too late. Both of them were wet all the way down. My brother Joe wasn't going to take a chance on that happening again, so he'd hide while I talked for both of us. And then I got down, and my mama got me, and she got my little brother. We went out the front of the store. I'd already explained to Santa Claus clearly that I wanted a red scooter, and my little brother, whom he couldn't see, but he could probably remember, he wanted a red scooter too. And Santa Claus had agreed that that might happen. Well, we went out the front door of Belk's store, and we went directly across the street, and we went in Turner's store. Santa Claus is fast. He is already over there. I thought, how'd you get over here so fast? You're too big a fat to run that fast. How'd you do that? But I knew I had to talk to him again because 9 years old, you know what I'd figured out? Santa Claus has an extremely small memory. I got in line while my brother played sliding board on those little stools they fit shoes with. Finally, it was my turn. I got up in his lap, and he goes, "Ho, ho, ho, what's your name, little? I thought I told you not 10 minutes ago, right on the other side of the street over there. If you can't remember something 10 minutes, write it down. Give yourself a pencil for Christmas. Give yourself the paper. Write it down. Maybe you're getting too old for this job." I bet I talked to Santa Claus 50 times that year. Before finally, no matter where I saw him, he knew my name and knew what I wanted. Well, our mother taught second grade at Hazelwood School. And so on the last day of school before Christmas, we had to wait after school with her while she totally took down all the Christmas decorations in her room and packed them away so when kids came back to school on the 2nd of January, they wouldn't even remember Christmas had happened. By the time we finally got that done, it was 5 o'clock and it was just getting dark. And we started home, and my mama said, "Now, it's almost time for your daddy to get off work at the bank. Let's not go home and have to turn around and come right back. Let's just go up to town and we can window shop a little bit, and then he'll get in the car and we'll just all go home together that way to save a trip." I thought, window shop. I know what that means. Look at stuff we can't get. Well, that's what we did. We parked right in front of the bank, so when he came out, he'd see the car. And we walked up and down the street, and he came up the street and found us. And we got back in the car, and we started toward home. Now, because my dad worked at the bank, he was automatically the treasurer of every organization he had anything to do with. And that included the Lions Club. And we were on our way home, and it had gotten pretty full dark by now, and we were passing Charlie Woodard's, Charlie's Drive-In Restaurant. And my mama said, Joe, it is dark, and I haven't even thought about what to fix for supper tonight. Do you think we could just stop and get something at Charlie's and eat there on the way home? And my dad said, well, that's a good idea, but I've got to finish the treasurer's report for the Lions Club tonight. So let's get curb service, and then we'll just take it home and eat it. So we pulled in on the curb service side and tooted the horn. Charlie himself came out. And we ordered 4 delicious Charlie burgers, his special version of a cheeseburger. 4 orders of taters, French fries, and very special, 4 Coca-Colas. In no time, Charlie came back out with the food. My daddy said, that was quick. And he said, we knew you were coming. And he had a greasy bag with all the French fries and the Charlie burgers in there. And those Coca-Colas, you know, those bottles, he had them not open because we were going to eat at home. They were stuck right here, you know, through the fingers of his hand, not open yet. And they were those, you know, returnable bottles. So my dad said, how much? And Charlie said, well, you got any empty bottles to swap? Because you remember, those bottles, you had to pay a 2-cent deposit on the bottle, unless you had empty bottles to swap. We always had bottles. You could hear them every time we went around the curve. And I was a helpful child. I didn't ask. I was just going to help. And I jumped out the door, headed around to the back of our Plymouth. You didn't need a key to open the trunk. It just had sort of a T-shaped handle there. And I turned that handle and opened that trunk to get bottles. And there was 2 red scooters. I went and slammed, no bottles! And my dad paid the bill and didn't even wait to get his change back. And we went home. And it was quiet from then till Christmas. I never said a word. Never said a word to anybody. Never said a word to my brother. Never said a word. Well, Christmas morning came and we got up. It's about 5 after midnight. That's legally morning. And I made my little brother Joe go in the living room first because I was sort of scared to go in there. I thought there might have been a backlash or something. And he went in and he said, come in here. You're never going to believe what's in here. I thought I might. And I headed in the living room. And do you know what? Santa Claus had brought my brother Joe a big wind-up train set. It was set up all the way around the Christmas tree. You wound it all the way up, and it would go around that track about 10 times before you had to wind it up again. And on the first trip, when it passed one little section of track, it would dump logs off on the side. And Santa Claus had brought me this beautiful little tool set. It was in a dovetail maple wooden box. And it had 2 hammers. It had a claw hammer and a little ball peen hammer. And it had a little saw that had a pointy blade on it. And it had 3 screwdrivers, 2 flat blade screwdrivers and a Phillips head screwdriver. And it had a bracer bit with 4 little bits. It was just beautiful. And of course everybody else was asleep, so I couldn't come up with any wood to try it out on. So the only thing I could come up with was to pull card table out of the closet and set it up and cut holes in the top of it to be sure, everything worked. Well, in a little while, my mom and daddy got up. And they came in and they weren't even upset about the card table. We had breakfast and we opened all the rest of the Christmas presents and we had a great time. Well, we got all settled down and my dad said, boys, come here a minute. Let me ask you something. He said, did all of you get, all of you, both of us, did you get everything you wanted for Christmas? We said, oh yes, we did. I said, I got things I hadn't even thought about. He said, well, let me tell you something. Sit down here on the arms of this chair just a minute. He sat down in the big old chair. He was in no hurry. And we sat on the arms on the side. He said, let me tell you something. He said, your mother and I kept hearing you talk to Santa Claus about something called red scooters. We heard that over and over again, but we didn't know what you were talking about. So one day we were up in town at Hal's hardware store, and all of a sudden your mom said, Joe, look over here, look, red scooters, that's what the boys want for Christmas. And then your mama got a real distraught look on her face. And I said, what's the matter, Lucille? She said, Joe, look how big they are. There is no way Santa Claus can get down the chimney with those. So boys, that very day, we went sneaking back up there and we got those red scooters and we've got them hidden in the trunk of the car. You can go out there and get them now if you want to. And to this very day, my brother Joe and I still think that was the best childhood Christmas we ever had. Because at very best, Santa Claus just comes through once a year. And our parents, they tried their best to come through every day. Well, thank you so much for this time together. I always love being here. My wife Trish loves being here so much. We love being part of your community, congregation and community both. We'll have another time tomorrow night. Everything will all be different tomorrow night. And then I'll be here for church on Sunday morning. And we'll have a story at church on Sunday morning as well. So go home very carefully. Thank you for being careful and being safe. And I hope I'll see a lot of you tomorrow night and again on Sunday morning. So long for now.
Get your coat.